Vice President Kamala Harris just lashed out at the European explorers who came to America, starting with Columbus. She was speaking before the National Congress of American Indians. This is their annual convention. And she says that these explorers ushered in a, quote, wave of devastation for Native Americans. She talks about the shameful past of America. And then she goes on to say what this wave of devastation is, because she's trying to show that it has an impact not just in the past, but in the present. She says, Native Americans are more likely to live in poverty, to be unemployed, and often struggle to get quality health care and find affordable housing. Not for a minute does she ask why that is, because those are facts. But what do those have to do with Columbus? What do they have to do with Cabral? What do they have to do with Cabot? What do they have to do with Cortez? Unanswered. She goes on to say, and now she appeals to Biden, who of course declared, he was the first president to declare Indigenous Peoples Day. And again, Biden goes, for generations, federal policies systematically sought to displace Native people. And my question is again, whose policies? Yeah, federal policies, but were these Democratic policies or Republican policies? Biden maintains a discreet silence on this topic. And he goes, today we recognize Indigenous peoples' resilience and strength, as well as the immeasurable positive impact that they have made on every aspect of American society. Now, this is to me the kind of, it's intended to be complimentary, but it is so over the top and ridiculous. What is the immeasurable impact on every aspect of American society that Native Americans have made? I could name 50 areas of American society in which Native Americans have made little or no impact. So this is the kind of thing where you are trying to do an after-dinner toast, but you end up insulting the people you're talking to because your rhetoric bears no resemblance to reality. Now, the simple fact of it is that the Democratic Party has been the scourge of the Indians. Not Columbus, not Cabral, not Cabot, but the Democratic Party, beginning with its founder, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is sometimes called the People's President. But the reason he was the people's president is essentially he developed a scheme to defeat the Indians militarily, beat them up, chastise them. This was his favorite word, and for him, chastise meant kill. So he would kill these Indians. He would take their land and drive them west. He would benefit personally from this, by the way. There's a very interesting book called Jackson Land, which lays this out in sort of shameful and excruciating detail. Basically, what Andrew Jackson would do is he'd drive the Indians off the land, then he'd know the Indian land is coming up for sale. Then he would send his own buddies to be surveyors of that land. They would then value the land extremely low. Andrew Jackson would put together investors, including himself, to buy that land. This is how this guy became fabulously rich, became one of the larger slave owners, because this is a guy who came from nothing, bought a huge plantation, employed all kinds of slaves. So he killed and ripped off the Indians, stole their land, and used the money to buy slaves. This is the Democratic Party, by the way. These are the people who are lecturing us now about morality and our shameful past. It's their shameful past, not your shameful past, not my shameful past. Now, the murderous policies adopted by Jackson. Think of the Trail of Tears. This was the displacement of the Cherokee Indians who were thrown off their land. They were essentially put into miserable, today we'd call them concentration camps, but they were miserable facilities. They got sick. They died in large numbers. This was actually carried out under Van Buren, who was Andrew Jackson's successor. But that was the second leading Democrat to become president, Andrew Jackson's vice president, in a sense, carrying out Andrew Jackson's policies. So all of this history, by the way, the role not of America, not of Columbus, who came 300 years earlier, but of the Democratic Party in destroying these Indian nations, ripping off their land for personal gain. And if you follow the machinations of Andrew Jackson, it's almost like this is an early incarnation of the Clinton Foundation. Except, you might say, well, wait a minute, the Clinton Foundation was basically selling off offices and doing a racketeering with foreign nations. But ironically, the Indian nations were considered foreign nations at that time. They were independent of the U.S. They were considered separate nations. Andrew Jackson often talked of his dealings with the Indians as if it was, quote, foreign policy. And this was a guy who figured out how to make money on foreign policy long before Hillary Clinton did, long before Joe Biden did. This is the deeply corrupt history of the Democratic Party. And in the next segment, I'm going to bring the story up to the present, to show how Democrats now continue their tradition of exploitation and devastation. So yes, is there a shameful past? There is, and it comes from the Democrats. Is it true that there is a wave of devastation that has been and is being visited on Native Americans? Yes, and it's also coming from the party of the donkey.